Hey, what's up everybody and welcome back to News Dose. It is Monday, so I hope everybody had a great, fantastic weekend. Maybe you got to play some good games, or maybe you spent some time with your family, but whatever the case may be, I hope you had a great weekend, and hopefully this video will bring a little joy to your Monday as well, because it was actually a pretty busy weekend in terms of gaming news. A little unexpected, but PlayStation was all over the map, and I mean that quite literally, because PlayStation boss Jim Ryan is reportedly now flying around to stop that Xbox Activision Blizzard acquisition. Yeah, his displeasure is a very real thing, and he is very, very upset. It also sounds like Sony's prepping to bring back yet another PlayStation 4 game with a remaster or remake of sorts, and you know, when you first hear that, I know what you're thinking. I thought it as well. Bloodborne plus 60 frames per second. It's finally happening. Sony's listening to their fans here. Let's go, baby. But no, that's not actually what's happening here at all, and really this might just leave you scratching your head instead. This might actually be another one of their odd choices, but we'll dive into that a little later on in the video and kind of discuss why they might have made this decision. Per usual though, if you do find yourself enjoying the video, go and hit those buttons below, like, subscribe, and of course hit that bell. It helps out the channel a ton, and I do very much appreciate it. Let's go and get right into things though, starting off with a new Nintendo game that's set to release later this week on October 6th, and it's still almost hard to believe that this game is actually being ported over. Of course, I'm talking about NieR Automata, one of my absolute favorite games that released last generation. For those that's yet to play this game, I really cannot recommend this game enough. It is absolutely amazing. But this port does pose a very legitimate question. How does it perform on the Switch? You know, this game wasn't even completely stable on the base PlayStation 4 when it first launched, so there's been some skepticism on how this port will actually run on the Switch, but I'm happy to tell you all today that the Switch version has yielded some very good early impressions. It does currently have an 87 overall score on Metacritic with 11 reviews as of this moment, and from everything that I've seen, it runs very well at 1080p and 30 frames per second. It does sound like on occasions it does slow down in overly intensive scenes, but for the most part, it's a stable 30 frames per second, which is very nice to hear, and the visual quality is quite good as well. Of course, it's not going to be as impressive as other versions out there, which runs at 60 frames, but being able to play NieR Automata on a handheld device like this, yeah, it might be worth it for a lot of people out there. I mean, again, this is an absolutely amazing game, and I mean, I'm even considering rebuying it myself, because it is that good. Without a doubt, though, it sounds like NieR is one of the most impressive ports available on the Switch, so definitely keep an eye out for this one when it releases later this week. Next up, let's talk about Tencent and some more acquisitions. I know we haven't talked about enough acquisitions this year, but really there's been a few major players in the ongoing acquisition season thus far. You have Sony, you have Microsoft, the Embracer Group, and then quietly in the background, you have Tencent. Now, Tencent has been operating in a different way than the other three, because what they've been doing over the last few years is that they've mostly been acquiring minority stakes in different companies. It might actually surprise you, in all the different companies that they've actually invested in, they have a minority stake in Epic Games. Actually, I believe 40%. They've also invested in Activision Blizzard, Ubisoft, Platinum Games, Krafton, From Software. That one's interesting. Square Enix, and the list just kind of goes on and on and on. So they've been very active in that way, but now they're vowing to shift their strategy from making smaller minority investments to instead, quote-unquote, aggressively seek full game company acquisitions that are overseas, most notably gaming assets in Europe. This was reported by Reuters. Now, Tencent already fully owns various AAA studios such as Riot Games. They have Turtle Rock, Sumo, and Splash Damage. But from the sounds of it, or at least how it appears here, they will be looking for more, and this is quietly actually pretty big news. You have to remember that Tencent is actually the biggest game publisher in the world from a revenue standpoint. They have a lot of developers, a lot of that's on the mobile side of things, but again, they do have some AAA studios, as I just said a moment ago. But the thing about Tencent is they have the money, they have the experience in gaming, so they could become a much more prominent player, as reportedly they are seeking for more studio acquisitions outside of China. Speaking of acquisitions, we might as well go and talk about Activision Blizzard once again, as Microsoft continues to try and get that through regulations. One thing has become very clear though, Sony They're not happy about this buyout, and they're using as much power as they possibly can in the hopes to get these regulators to shut things down. We have seen some public documents where Sony has complained to the Brazil regulators, and then over in the UK, the same thing happened. Though in the UK situation, Sony, they started to be a little bit more public about things. In Jim Ryan's words, he believes that Microsoft's Call of Duty's proposal is inadequate, which the irony to that statement is still just wow. But now he's also making the rounds with the European Commission as well. A new report from Deal Reporter surfaced over the weekend claiming that PlayStation boss Jim Ryan is now meeting with regulators in person to voice his concerns. This was posted by Seeking Alpha, and as you can see here, it says, Sony Interactive Entertainment head Jim Ryan met with European Commission on September 8th at its headquarters in Brussels, according to a Deal Reporter item, which cited sources familiar. Google is also said to have worries about the transaction and has voiced its concerns to regulators. Sony, which makes the PlayStation video gaming console, has reportedly voiced its concerns that Microsoft could potentially limit access to Activision's Call of Duty franchise. Google has had interactions with Brazil's antitrust regulator CADE on the deal, according to regulatory filings in Brazil. Now, there's actually two different things happening here. One with Sony, and then the surprise inclusion here is that Google might also be voicing their concern as well. I'll kind of come back to that here in just a moment. But first, we need to talk about Sony, because Jim Ryan is apparently now meeting with these regulators in person, which to me means that he wants to have an in-depth conversation about his side of things. He wants to paint a horrific picture, more or less, and why an acquisition like this is bad for not only Sony, but the game industry as a whole. And describing that in person where regulators that admittedly probably don't know all that much about the game industry, well, they're going to have questions. And then him being there, he's going to be able to specifically answer those with, again, his very own version. It just once again shows you how aggressive Sony is being in their attempt to get these regulators to think long and hard about approving this deal. The problem that he continues to run into, though, is pretty much what we've talked about time and time again. Now, we've talked about this pretty extensively, but yes, Sony does a lot of the same things that he's been complaining about, and that's the thing about perspectives. There's multiple sides, and Microsoft will point out the irony in his statements. And that's the thing, because it really is ironic when you start to think about it. But if this acquisition does go through, I mean, Sony, they kind of did this to themselves with all their business decisions in the game industry really since the inception of the PlayStation brand. So because Sony, they're purchasing studios at a rapid pace, because they are the market leader, and also with how aggressive they've been with exclusivity, I just don't see how regulators can look at things like that and make a case that would actually hold up in court. And that's ultimately the big thing. I mean, even if regulators don't like an acquisition like this, they still have to play by the rules. They can't just say, oh, we're not happy about this, it's over. No, if they say no, well, Microsoft can then take them to court, and I think that Microsoft actually has a pretty good case because, again, a lot of the things that Sony's been doing. On top of that, Microsoft continues to be very adamant that Call of Duty will remain multi-platform, so I think it's just very difficult for these regulators to make a case against Microsoft, even if they're not necessarily happy with things. So despite Sony's displeasure, as we're again seeing here, I think Microsoft will eventually get this acquisition through regulations. It might take them a while, and Sony might ultimately be able to slow things down, but ultimately, I think Microsoft does have a good case to work with, in part because of Sony themselves. The mention of Google in this report, though, this here is new, and I thought this was rather interesting because it was just kind of made as a happenstance comment, like, oh yeah, Google's also voiced their concerns as well. But that claim seems kind of odd to me, considering we've seen the Brazil documents, and they never complained there, or at least from what we saw. So I'm not really sure where this newfound concern is coming from, and in fact, the reference that they used in this article was Brazil. So, I mean, maybe some of the redacted comments that we couldn't see, or maybe they just changed their minds since then. I'm not really sure about all of that, but, I mean, reportedly, you have both Google and Sony now complaining to regulators about this acquisition. Will this all be enough to get regulators to seriously contemplate to try to seek and stop it, though? That question still remains. My guess is no, for all the reasons that we've already talked about, and just with how much competition there is in the game industry. But I guess we'll see. I mean, we're all kind of on this wild ride together, and it's quite unprecedented. But as you're seeing, things are really starting to heat up now, and we should get plenty of new updates in the coming months. So as always, I'll keep you posted, so make sure to subscribe for all the latest on Activision Blizzard. Also, a new strange and surprising PlayStation game seemingly leaked out online. And yes, this one caught a lot of people by surprise, and people are now wondering, what in the world is Sony doing? I know I certainly wasn't expecting it, but MP First posted a big report that Sony is looking to release a Horizon Zero Dawn remaster or remake of sorts. Yeah, you know that 5-year-old PlayStation 4 game, apparently that now needs a remake. And this was also later on corroborated by the Video Game Chronicle, with them adding a multiplayer Horizon is coming. And then Gamatsu, they joined in by saying a Sony document was shared with them, revealing this remaster is indeed true alongside some other unannounced projects. So a lot of different well-respected outlets have actually heard about this leak, and it right now does appear to be legit. And actually, let's just go take a look at what's being described. As posted by Gamatsu, they say, the remastered release will reportedly feature an improved lighting system, overhauled textures, and better animations, as well as new character models to match those found in the sequel, Horizon Forbidden West. The accessibility options, quality of life improvements, and graphics modes of the sequel are also said to be part of this new release. The online multiplayer project is said to feature customization around the various tribes of the Horizon franchise. However, those details were not verified by MP First. So based on this description, it actually sounds a lot like what they did with The Last of Us Part 1. They updated the character models in that game, putting it more in line with the newer release. But, I mean, with that said, we're also seeing very, very similar reactions from fans. Fans are seemingly confused, bewildered on why Sony is putting resources on making these type of games. I mean, Horizon Zero Dawn, this is a game that released just 5 years ago on the PlayStation 4, and it still looks great to this day. In fact, it is playable on the PlayStation 5, which makes this whole situation even crazier, as it did get that 4K 60 frames enhanced update. So what in the world is going on here? Why does a 5-year-old game like this need a remake? And more importantly, and this is the million-dollar question, how much is it going to cost? Now, we saw what happened with The Last of Us Part 1, and I think this is one of the reasons that fans are kind of upset about this situation, because I think if they would announce something like this as maybe like a $10 upgrade or a budget title, people would probably be like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. But that's not what happened with The Last of Us Part 1. That was another remake that nobody was asking for, and despite it having a remaster on a PlayStation 4 that's still playable on the PlayStation 5, and yes, that game still does look good, Sony decided to price The Last of Us Part 1 at $70. So are we going to see something similar here with Horizon Zero Dawn? Is this what Sony's come to under Jim Ryan's leadership? I mean, I like PlayStation, I like their games, but Jim Ryan, man, he has made some decisions. He does some things. That's about all I'm going to say about all that. But even then, I don't know. This is just a weird situation. And you know, the thing is, I think a lot of fans out there would be more than thrilled if these were games that actually need them, and if Sony were to actually have fair pricing. That's still the big question. We'll come back to that in a moment. But even in regards to PlayStation 4 titles, you have games like Bloodborne, which fans are pleading to get a 60 frames update. And I'm sure if they announce something like that, fans would be absolutely stoked. In fact, I mean, people were happy about the Horizon Zero Dawn 60 frame 4K update. But who is asking for a PlayStation 5 remake of a PlayStation 4 game that already got a PlayStation 5 update? I am genuinely fascinated by this decision, and I will be very curious on how a game like this performs sales-wise. Hopefully, this will be a budget title at most, but if they ask for $70 again, I think fans are going to lose their mind. I guess we'll see about all of that, but to be fair, I think one of the reasons they might be doing things like this is that Sony is trying to pair their movie releases with these games. We are starting to see this trend where they're really feeding into one another. You have Uncharted. They released the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection right before that movie came out. And then with The Last of Us, they just released Part 1. And we do know there is a Horizon show in development as well. So I think they're trying to maybe capitalize on all of that by pairing them together in close proximity. That way their movies and games can benefit from one another. So they might be trying to do something like that here. But I don't know. I mean, I literally never heard one person ever say that they want a remake of Horizon Zero Dawn. All I can really say by this point is that it was unexpected, and I do very much wonder who's actually going to buy a game like this. Who knows? We'll see if they have success with this, I guess, and if they do, I mean, I guess that opens the door for all sorts of remakes of rather new games, I guess. But let me know what you all think about all this. How much would you be willing to pay for a remake such as Horizon Zero Dawn, if you're willing to at all? Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all what home console is your favorite generation of PlayStation. I'll probably do one for Nintendo and Xbox later this week, but as you can see here, 11% of you all did vote for the PlayStation 1, 48% being the PlayStation 2. That was the runaway winner here, 9% for the PlayStation 3, 19% for the PlayStation 4, and then 13% of you voted for the PlayStation 5. So that is actually interesting. The PlayStation 5 did beat out the PlayStation 1, so a little bit of a surprise there, but yeah, I wasn't overly surprised by PlayStation 2 being the winner here. This is the best-selling console of all time. So yes, there's a lot of love for the PlayStation 2. A lot of people grew up on this console, and I mean, it has so many games available for it. So yeah, that was a fantastic console. And you know, just looking through the comments, it was clear just how loved the PlayStation 2 was. As you can see here, Blackstorm in the comments said the PlayStation 2 is uncontested as the greatest console of all time, in my opinion. I mean, it even played all the classics from the PlayStation 1, which that is important. It did have that backwards compatibility. Its own library is full of classics from multiple genres, but mainly I will always love its extensive catalog of JRPGs. Ephemeral, Fantasia, you have Suikoden 3, Laguia 2, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Then there's Grandia 2, Shadow Hearts from the New World, Final Fantasy 10 and 12, Dragon Quest 8, Rogue Galaxy, and Wild Arms 3, just to name a few of the ones that gave me wonderful memories. But last and certainly not least, the generation gave us Onimusha and Devil May Cry. Here's hoping Onimusha returns soon, since they are dropping that anime. I am with you, Blackstorm. I do hope we do get a new Onimusha title. That would be absolutely amazing. And I think that there's actually a good chance of it with that anime coming, as we talked about the other day. It does seem like Capcom might be prepping for something like that, just like as they did with Dragon's Dogma. But there you have it. The legendary PlayStation 2 was the runaway winner here. Though, you know, as for me, what's kind of amusing for me is that apparently my favorite is actually in last place here, because my favorite is actually the PlayStation 3. I adored the PlayStation 3. It just has so many great exclusive titles, whether that be Killzone, Resistance, my very favorite being Uncharted. I love Uncharted. I actually replayed through the entire series just as of recent. Mod Nation Racers, that's another one of my favorites, and the list just kind of goes on and on and on. So for me, my favorite is the PlayStation 3. It's certainly not the most beloved, and the pricing at the beginning was atrocious, and you know, they had to kind of battle their way back. But overall, I felt like that was the generation that they really got their studios to be those premier studios that we kind of see all of these years later. I think it all kind of began with the PlayStation 3. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.